What's up everybody, this is Edward, your favorite homeboy, and today we're going to talk about the pros and cons of investing in short-term rentals. As you know, I'm a long-term rentals kind of guy. I manage long-term rentals, I have long-term rentals for myself, it's how I started in real estate investing. But if you've ever wondered what the differences were, if you've ever been into an Airbnb and you're like, I wonder how much money this house makes. I wonder how it compares to a long-term rental. Stick around to the end of this video where we're going to compare the differences and look at some real-life examples. I took a trip recently to the Poconos to visit a short-term rental property that I bought a little less than a year ago. You can see the house tour here in this link. There are a few real estate investors I follow on YouTube that are pretty outspoken against short-term rentals. Grant Cardone and Graham Stephan are two of them that come to mind. Graham seems to think that if you can't cash flow without Airbnb, you're doing it wrong and you're exposing yourself to a lot of risk. And Grant is taking it a step further, and he says that even with Airbnb, the cash flow isn't even good enough. It's not consistent enough to justify it. So in reality, short-term rentals are very different than long-term rentals, just like residential is different than commercial. It's different. It doesn't make it bad or a bad investment. They're going to have different risks, but they're also going to have different returns. So we're going to see how Airbnb or having an Airbnb is a great way to diversify your portfolio. And as far as what Grant says about the consistency of the revenue, we'll take a look at that in just a little bit as well. Before we get into the advantages, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button below to support my channel. All right, so let's get into the advantages of the long-term rentals. There's three advantages of long-term rentals. There's consistency, there is wear and tear, and there's time investment. So let's talk about consistency first. The first is consistency dealing with occupants. So of course, in a long-term rental, they're gonna have the advantage. If you get a good renter in your home, it's going to be consistent over the life of that lease. Whereas a short-term rental, if you get a good tenant or a good guest, then you're gonna have to do that like 50 more times throughout the year. So it's gonna take more effort. It's not as consistent. But it also works the other way around. If you get a bad tenant, then you're stuck with them. Whereas if you get a bad guest, you only have to deal with them for a couple days before you get a new one. However, I'm still gonna give that advantage to the long-term rental because there are things you can do to mitigate that risk. It's very rare that we evict anyone. We haven't evicted anyone in our Virginia, Maryland, DC market at all. So getting someone that bad is a very low risk for long-term rentals. The other thing about consistency that's an advantage for long-term rentals is that the income is consistent. For example, if you're asking for $2,000 a month in rent, you can expect $24,000 a year. It's pretty consistent. Whereas a short-term rental, it may not be as consistent because each month is going to be different based off occupancy and the rates you charge. But what's an advantage can also be a disadvantage for a long-term rental because your ceiling is also pretty consistent. You can't go up and down and have a huge swing in your market price because your market's really going to limit that. Whereas in the short-term rental market, you can outmaneuver your competition. For example, in our first year of ownership, we're able to get 17% more than the previous owner on our short-term rental. 17% is a lot. It's a lot, especially given the fact that it's our first year that we're managing this home, first year of ownership, which is usually a lower year, and it's the year of the coronavirus. So take those two big things into consideration, and we're getting 17% more than the previous owner. 17% more for a long-term rental is very difficult to achieve. Usually, if you're pricing yourself that much higher, you're gonna be sitting on the market for a long time. Okay, what's the second advantage? Wear and tear. For a long-term rental, the occupant, the renter, is normally going to take care of the place better. They're living in there, they don't wanna get embarrassed with people coming over and they're tearing it up. And of course, you're gonna hear the stories of the hoarders and the people just trashing the place. But again, those are very far and few between. So we're not gonna talk about the exceptions. So in a normal rental, that long-term renter will take care of the place more. Plus, if you have a repair deductible, which means they have some skin in the game. They're paying for work orders, some sort of $25, $50 repair deductible, then there's just more of a partnership mentality, so they're gonna be less likely to just abuse the home. A short-term guest for a short-term renter is a little different because they're lugging their luggage and their boxes and their coolers in the house every time they're moving in and out. They're not moving furniture, I'll give them that, but they are harder on the house, and you can't really recoup that cost because you nickel and dime them for every little nitnoid thing. Then that could affect your ratings, which could affect your business. So the damages, the wear and tear, you should be prepared for a little bit worse for a short-term rental. So the advantages are consistency, wear and tear, and lastly, time investment. If you're going to self-manage, that's pretty obvious. You're going to spend a lot more time managing your short-term rental because you're putting 50-some people into the house, sometimes up to 100 stays a year for some Airbnbs. For us, it's just over 50 versus just one time. So the time commitment is huge. Now, if you're going to hire a professional manager, that kind of equals out. But the problem with that is if you hire a property manager for a short-term rental, then you kind of lose the advantages of the higher returns. So what's a good compromise? A good compromise would be if you hired an employee or some team member to offset the work that you have to do on the short-term rental. Then you get the best of both worlds. Your time commitment is not as high, and you still get the higher returns. Either way, the time investment still goes to long-term rentals. So the advantages are time investment, wear and tear, and commitment. Now, what are the three advantages of a short-term rental? One is the sales process. When I say sales process, I'm talking about the process to get an occupant into the property to start generating revenue. And I'm not focusing on the time it takes because obviously you're going to be doing it way more frequently for a short-term rental because the advantage for time has already been given to the long-term rental. But as far as the ease of the sales process, it's really easy for Airbnb or a short-term rental. Once you get the marketing done, the screening is pretty much non-existent, and you can put a person into your home very easily. No contracts need to be signed pretty much. Whereas a long-term rental, you could be on the market for 1 to 2 months, and you're screening them and you're interviewing them and you're signing the lease. So the process is a little bit more difficult. So the first advantage is sales process. Second advantage is perks. You can't say, excuse me, Mr. Renter, I'd like to stay in my house for about a week. Is that okay? My parents are over, can they stay in one of the bedrooms? Whereas on a short-term rental, the advantages are you can take a short little mini vacation and just stay at your house whenever you want, or stay in the off-peak times when it's not being rented anyways. We like our house because it's halfway between where our sister-in-law's family is, and it's a great midway point, and it's close to our friends in New York City. So instead of them coming all the way down to our house, we can meet midway. So it's a great way to meet with friends and family, or just have a little retreat so you can use personally. So that's a great perk. So the advantages are sales process, perks, and drumroll please, this is one you've been waiting for, cash flow. Cash flow is definitely going to be much higher because you're charging per night, and you get to charge a premium for that. And it's the hospitality business. You're not just saying, here's a house, you do everything yourself. No, you're providing everything, linens, towels, all the furniture. It's hospitality, you can charge more. But with that also comes, of course, higher expenses because you're covering the utilities, the external maintenance, and property management can be higher as well. But again, you can offset that by hiring a team member and having limited involvement. All right, so let's compare 3 properties. The first property is Village Park in Texas. It's a long-term rental, and that value is about $250,000. Now we're gonna just kind of multiply it by 2 because we want to be in the same price range and kind of make it apples to apples. So if you multiply it by 2, your down payment, closing cost, the amount you have invested will be about $125,000, and your return is going to be 11%. Old Stage, the one I just bought less than a year ago, $387,000, got at a good price because there's a lot of work that had to be done to it. Down payment, closing costs, plus renovations, I invested about $130,000, so pretty close, 125 versus 130, but the pre-tax investment rate of return on that was 19%, almost double the amount of the long-term rental. Now to compare it with another short-term rental that I just saw, you can see that here, or is it here? We did a tour on that with my real estate agent in the Poconos. That was $410,000. And if you put in about $120,000, which is down payment, very small amount of renovations, 22 Mountain Crest is the property, that rate of return would be 29%. So of course that's all forecasted because I don't own that property, but definitely 29% versus 11%, that's almost triple. So is it worth it? Overall, I'd say yes. If you have the bandwidth and or you can hire some sort of team member to help you manage it and minimize the amount of work you put into it, triple the returns is definitely worth it. Let me know in the comments below if short-term rentals is something you've tried before, and if you're doing that right now, what kind of returns are you seeing? I'd love to know what type of returns you're seeing and what type of locations and how that compares to the Poconos. So comment below, let's trade notes. And if you haven't already, please subscribe, hit the notifications bell for future videos. And this is your favorite homeboy, signing out.